Ei. Okei, sitten me annetaan Samanille puheenvuoro. Jos vähän esittelen, Saman tulee Englannista. Hän on moraalifilosofian tohtori, mutta vaikka hän on filosofi, niin on tehnyt hyvin käytännönläheistä työtä jo monta kymmentä vuotta ympäri maailmaa edistääkseen ihmisten kansalaisuutta, erilaisia asioita, ja Simon kertoo hänen kokemuksiaan ympäri maailmaa, mitä ollaan saavutettu näiden tapojen kautta, mitä joustavuudella on saavutettu. What does flexibility mean?
I always admire your sisu. Is that I said it right? You know, you're now going to have to listen to an Englishman speaking a foreign language. Although I know from all my time in Finland how well you speak English, although I've had people apologise to me for their English in Finland. Just think about it. I don't think you should be apologising to a foreigner for your English when I can just mangle a few words of Finnish. So thank you for your patience in advance. I am speaking in English, that's the bad news. We translated lots of the slides into Finnish, so as I present, the slides hopefully will help a little bit. The other good news is I think it's 35 minutes till coffee. So you've only got to last 35 minutes of me talking, then I think it's half an hour for coffee, and then you come back and we'll talk. Hopefully I'll get you to ask some questions as well in that period, so you won't just be listening to me. I'd say that some of the pictures I've used, or all these pictures that I've used here, are from people with learning disabilities from Tampere. So it's the fantastic artwork that they've produced for the office of KVPS. So thank you to them. So I'm going to talk about personal budgets and what they mean and what we've learned internationally about personal budgets. So what are they? I mean, one of the things that's most confusing is the language, even in English. There are lots of different words that get used, but actually, really the idea of personal budgets has been around for 50 years. It's as old as the independent living movement. As soon as people with disabilities started asking for the right to be in control of their own lives, then they required that the funding was individualised and the funding was under their control. And ultimately that's what personal budgets is about. I think, unfortunately, although there has been a lot of research, I think that rarely does the research get put together. And that might be the fault of all of the different innovators of different systems, because they keep calling the different ideas different things. So you can just see from this slide, we have, in England we had a system called direct payments, which was a form of personal budgets. Then we had in control, personal budgets, individual budgets, but all roughly the same thing. If you go to America, you find in mental health services, cash and counselling. For older people in Australia, they have something called consumer directed care. You have independent living fund. It goes on and on and on. And very rarely do people really see this is really the same idea. This is really fundamentally the same idea. What I'm going to talk about is what I think is most useful for Finland at the point in time that you are. And a lot of the things that I will refer to are available in these published reports on the Centre for Welfare Reform's website. England, where I come from, is not a perfect place. Whatever I say today does not mean you should all get on a plane and come and live in my country. One of the problems we have in my country, and I hesitate to be too political because we're very close to government here, is but we don't have a very good government at the moment. I'm putting that very mildly. And one of the things our government is doing is cutting benefits, income for people with disabilities and services for people with disabilities. Although some people may think this, they are not doing this because of personal budgets. And they are doing this because people with disabilities in my country are an easy target for cuts. They're not well organised, and they're divided, and people and families and NGOs are not united. So they've been an easy group for our government to attack. And that's the real reason. And I know in Finland you're going through a lot of changes, and you'll need to think about how do you organise to defend services and support. But this is a political, not a technical process, ultimately. It's about power. While England is not heaven, and you shouldn't rush to England, we have made a lot of progress in personal budgets. And this slide represents really the change that we've seen in the last 10 years. So more than half of our whole social care system is now driven by personal budgets. And about a quarter is what we call direct payments, where the money goes directly to people. And just over a quarter is managed by municipalities. Interestingly, and if we have time, I'll talk about this later, one of the models of personal budgets that hasn't really flourished in England is the model where the personal budget is managed by a service provider or a broker or another organisation, even though there's a lot of evidence that's a good model. And one of the reasons that has not happened is because the way in which the implementation of personal budgets developed did not encourage it, and I think that's been a bit of a mistake in England. And when I go back to England, that's one of the things I'll be working on. So how does personal budgets work? You've already really heard some real life experience, and Arne has talked through really the core model. But if we stand even further back and think about the whole system of social services, many health services, education services, what we find is that the system is organised in a strange way. And I say strange but actually it probably seems quite natural. What we did, and a lot of countries did this after World War II, in developing the welfare state, we gave our taxes, we paid taxes and we gave it to the government. And the government said, right, we're going to meet people's needs. How are we going to do that? Oh look, there's some lovely professionals, doctors, all sorts of people turning up. We can trust them, and they give the money to those good people. And then those people organise services which they give to people with disabilities. And that might seem a kind of rational process. But if you think about it, think how disempowering that is for the person who receives that gift. They have no control over it. The money has already been spent on services that have been organised and defined by professionals and by government. Why? Why is that a sensible way of organising to meet the needs of individuals? I can see that for some services, if we want an ambulance service or an emergency service, then yes, let's organise that for Helsinki or Tampere, or, those things need to be organised like that. But things that are really about my whole life cannot be organised by the government. They cannot even really be organised by the most brilliant professional in the world. They have to be organised by me, my family, the people who really know me. They have to be defined by what's important to me. So, 25 years ago or so, I started talking about why, instead of this professional gift model, why don't we talk about a citizenship model? Why don't we start thinking about the person as a citizen with rights one of our rights, if we've got a disability, is to get additional support so that we can be a citizen. But we want that support to be under our control so that we can live the life that's right for us. And the community isn't just a taxpayer who just funds all of this. The community is us, all of us. The community is the person with a disability, their family, their friends, their neighbours, the whole world in which they live. And their life is made there. Life is made as a citizen in community. It's not made in services. In practice, I think what we've discovered, and I think certainly people with learning disabilities have discovered, is that the process that gets called deinstitutionalisation has been very long and very slow. And even when we close big institutions, and you haven't closed all your institutions in Finland, have you? Even when you do, often what we do is we put people in new institutions. And it takes many years for people to get out of those institutions into ordinary life. Personal budget is not the whole answer to this problem, but it's an important element of equipping people to have a life of citizenship. It's about trying to change what I put in here as the kind of service systems that hold people back. Actually, Finland at the moment is thinking about experimenting with basic income. That's a good innovation, I think, that will also help people free themselves up from the benefit systems that also hold people back. So there are lots of things that we do that get in the way of people's citizenship. Personal budgets is about trying to change the funding to try and make support work better for people with disabilities. And I think you can understand personal budgets as really being about three very important moral principles. The first is equality. We are all equal. And the funny thing about being equal is because we're also different, we sometimes all need different rights, different entitlements in order to be equal. So the money, the personal budget, is really an adjustment, a change that we make in order that some people who might be held back or disadvantaged can be equal on a level playing field. So equality is fundamental. The second thing is freedom or self-determination. Citizens are free, they make their own plans, they do the things that are important to them. We often do this with friends and family, we don't do it on our own in a bubble, but that freedom, like vapaus, is that the vapaus? I see these little Finnish words I'm hanging on to, but that is an essential ingredient, not just of citizenship, but of our basic humanity. When you crush people's freedom, you crush their spirit. The third really important principle is participation in community, being able to join in, get in. You see on my funny little picture, I try and represent the community with the idea of a circle and the colour green, but I'm not saying services are bad or have no place. Many services are very good and useful, but their place needs to be determined by the person. They need to fit into people's lives. So that red triangle shouldn't surround us and define us. We use what we need and we value good professional expertise, but we don't want to be told how to live. So, today, as you've discussed already, Finland is exploring how to make the idea of choice more important. I would say actually the word choice, certainly in English, is probably not quite the right word. Choice for me is a bit like going to the shops and I could pick, I'm trying to think of a good Finnish example. Well, I could pick Fazer chocolate, or I could check, what's the other Finnish brand? See, we've been just having Fazer chocolates. Well, I could have the Swedish one. Is that Marabou? Yes. So that's a choice, isn't it? Fazer chocolate, Marabou chocolate. But actually, life is not about choosing things at supermarkets. It's about controlling everything I do, how I do it, who I do it with. It's about building a life for myself. So I prefer the word control to the word choice. And I think that that's the key thing that we want to try and see develop around the world. And what Arne and I have done in the conversations that we've been having with policymakers in Finland is to try and say, well, personal budgets is useful because it offers a degree of flexibility and control that is really missing from the current system. Because people can really, the idea of a personal budget is as simple as people can use this in any way that they think meets their needs. And the only thing we kind of put in brackets is as long as it's not illegal. And the reason that we can be that flexible is also, though, that a personal budget isn't quite the same as personal income. It's something that's still agreed, the state is still involved, you're still in a partnership with social work about making sure that you're doing okay, so that life is okay, so that we may want to talk about this more. So there's still some checks and balances, but the checks and balances are not about limiting flexibility, but they're about looking at the outcomes that people are achieving. So when you think about these systems and you go around the world and look at them, there are lots of interesting differences. So there are all sorts of debates about how we work out how much is the right amount of money. Resource allocation, we've sometimes called that in England, but you can go to America, to Australia, to France, to Belgium. You'll find different systems in different areas. So these are interesting questions, perhaps not fundamental. There are also interesting questions about how people plan, who plans with people. My friends in Canada are very, very keen on the idea of what they call independent brokerage, which is that in order to manage a personal budget, you've got to have an independent person planning with you. To be honest, I tried that 20 odd years ago and it didn't work very well, and in England when we introduced these ideas, we kind of said the opposite. We said actually people should be allowed to plan in the way that suits them, and they should get assistance in the way that suits them. And so we went to a much more flexible approach around planning, and that's, I think, but it's an interesting area that certainly could do with more research. How do you help people take control? How do you help people with very severe disabilities, maybe severe learning disabilities, dementia, mental health problems, have control? So there are answers to that, and different systems have slightly different answers. How do you keep learning and innovating? This is not a magical button, yes, that you press. Oh, we've suddenly decided to have a system of personal budgets. We've pressed that button, and suddenly we're in a wonderful world. You know, what's going on today is that, I mean, as we hear Pekka's story, we are stretching our minds about what's possible. And the only way that you can change your understanding of what's possible is by trying things out and listening from other people. And it's the two things together, the freedom to try things out and the ability to listen to other people. So we certainly have learned that what we call peer support, particularly listening to other families, listening to other people with disabilities, is critical to improving quality. But that's a process that also takes time. It doesn't happen by pressing a button. And how do we, one of the big challenges is how do you stop doing the wrong things? The main reason that personal budgets has been slow to really take over the world, I mean, 50 years is a long time for innovation. It still keeps growing, but it's a long time, isn't it? And I think, to be honest, if you look at the different countries and you ask people, why is it so difficult? You've got good results, good research, why has it been so difficult to change things? The answer you normally get is, well, the system doesn't like to give up power. There are important people who've got jobs and power and control, and they don't want to give up that power. And we have to honestly think about that. This is a positive process. It creates new opportunities for people, for families, and also for professionals. But it also means letting go of some things. You have to leave some things behind, and human beings find that very difficult. Why is it important? Well, the UN Convention of Rights and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or, I listed a whole range of articles that really are impacted by personal budgets and personal control. You cannot meet any of the requirements, it seems to me, of those articles without giving people freedom and the ability to fully participate in community. And personal budgets is a tool for that end. The Finnish constitution, like many constitutions, starts with the constitution guarantee the inviolability, the absoluteness of human dignity and the freedom, vapaus, I'll say it again, and rights of the individual, and promote justice in society. And it's interesting, we have a lot of constitutions around the world, and freedom is always kind of in the first sentence or so, and yet sometimes some people's freedom doesn't seem so important. Yes, and I think about not just the issue of personal budgets, but the issue about institutions. Why are there thousands of people, not just in Finland, but all around the world, who have effectively no personal freedom because they're in an institution? So we have these principles at the heart of our law, at the heart of our constitution, but we don't always seem to take them as seriously as we should. I also think that if we think about what we're trying to achieve in our own lives, what we're trying to achieve if we work as part of the welfare state, or what we're trying to achieve if we're in advocacy groups, NGOs, isn't citizenship part of that? Aren't we trying to build a community of citizens? And aren't citizens people who are free and in control of their own lives? The great thing about citizenship is, in fact, it's the way in which we connect our equality to our differences. We become citizens when we treat each other as equals in community. That's where the idea comes from. So I think it's fundamental, because we know it's a strange thing about human beings, isn't it? That morally we know that we're equal. We also really value being different, and we find it really difficult to put those two things together. But the way you put them together is you treat each other as equally worthy of respect. You respect each other. And that's really just another way of thinking about what citizenship is. Citizenship is how communities come together and treat each other respectfully as equals. What difference do personal budgets make? So, I've got to be honest, I have not read every research report on personal budgets in their different forms. I've read quite a few, but I've talked to people who tell me they've read every research report on personal budgets. I can't validate exactly that they have. The one thing that's absolutely clear is that there is no example in the world I'm aware of where personal budgets have made things worse. They always make things better for people. That's the good news. So I'll give you a few examples. So this is from a very, this is really from the first pilot we ran in England to give people personal budgets, and this represents how people's experience of citizenship changed before and after having a personal budget. So you can see the huge improvements in every area, but particularly control. This is quite an interesting research report, much more recent. Here, a service provider actually took all its what we call a block contract, so it had funding from a municipality for 85 people, and it divided that funding up into 85 personal budgets and gave people control of that. 3 people actually left the organisation, but 82 people stayed with the organisation, and those people experienced significant improvements. And the strange thing again is that this was done in the time of cuts. So the service provider was being cut. In fact, the service provider, it was going to be cut anyway, but it said to the municipality, at least let us individualise the services. At least let us have this opportunity to create more flexible support, individual by individual. I think one of the things that is really striking, it's one of the things that people really worry about, is risk and abuse. And we have quite a lot of evidence that people feel and experience personal budgets as an increasing way of being safe. Yes, that actually personal budgets makes people safer. So this is an example of that. And what I've done here is combined results from a number of different research reports just on the question of safety. And you can see again that either people feel it's no different, or they feel safer. A tiny number of people feel less safe. Why is this? Well, one of the fundamental things that I think we don't like talking about is that institutions, which is what people are leaving with personal budgets, are fundamentally unsafe. We often talk as if institutions are safe, and yet all the evidence suggests that this is where abuse is most likely to happen. This is data taken from actually from around older people. Interestingly, in the research noted, the research before we analysed this, noted that most abuse for older people happen to people in their own homes. Unfortunately, the researchers failed to calculate that most people are in their own homes. When you actually flip that round and say, what's the risk of being abused, then the risk of being abused was 10 times greater in residential care than in your own home. And I don't know about in Finland, but in England, if the social work system thinks you're at risk in the community, often its response is to move you into institutional care, even though all the data suggests institutional care is riskier for you. This gets even more extreme, and this is rather difficult to read. All these slides will be available online. But we've got 3,500 people in England who are people who are described as having challenging behaviour, people with learning disabilities or autism, who end up in private hospitals or institutions. We've closed our big ones, but we have quite a lot of small ones left. And the abuse rates that are now measured by our healthcare system are extraordinarily high. I'm not saying this is happening in Finland, I don't know. But I think this represents what we do know, which is that institutions are places where abuse is more likely. And the more institutional, the more abuse there will be. So it's not surprising that if you give people more control, connect them into community, you'll see risk go down. Other couple of interesting things is about how people spend their money. Again, there's less information about this than you would like, but what I did here is I took 2 separate reports that used the same methodology and I combined the results. And I think this does reflect something that's gone on a lot in England with personal budgets. A lot of people with learning disabilities in England spend their days in day centres. where activities are provided for people. There could be work activities, there could be leisure activities, but people have no control really of their day. They spend some hours usually getting to the day centre, their day is planned for them, and then they spend some hours on the bus going back from the day centre. This is how thousands and thousands of people with learning disabilities are forced to live their lives because of how the system organises daytime support.
Is that number pounds or euros?
No, it's numbers of instances. So in this case, it's not measuring the amount of money, it's the amount of people who use that money in that way. So just to make this clear, so down at the bottom, there are 2 people who used part of their personal budget to purchase a car. Yes, does that make sense? But right at the top, so there's 80 people who used part of their personal budget to access ordinary leisure facilities. Does that make sense? Yeah? So this gives you an indication of not really how much money, but the range of different things that people do. And if you look at these things, which start with accessing ordinary leisure, using personal assistance, getting assistance at home, holidays, support to be in work, support to go to college, so on and so forth, what is that telling you? When people take control, they join in community life. The problem, of course, is that there's 12 people there who've used part of their personal budget to purchase a day service. But you can imagine that if only 12 people are going to purchase a day service and nobody in Cambridgeshire, then day services are going to have to change very quickly and very radically, aren't they? Can you see that? I mean, this is what I mean, and this is really the obstacle to personal budgets, is that if you're running day services, or you're running residential care, or you're running other services, and you think you can't change, you think you're stuck doing the same thing, then you'll be very frightened of personal budgets, because personal budgets do mean change. Here's a couple of real-life examples. I'm watching my watch to make sure I don't delay your coffee. So I'm going to tell these couple of stories really quickly. Patrick is somebody who uses a personal budget managed by a service provider. Patrick has had a reputation for extreme challenging behaviour. If he was hurt or frightened, and often the triggers were very difficult to see, he could really hurt you. Really hurt you. He has autism, he has intellectual disability, he has a visual impairment. Using the approach of saying, well, this is Patrick's budget, we were able to develop a service for Patrick which kept Patrick safe and kept everybody safe, and has led to Patrick changing his behaviour over a long period of time. I always kind of know Patrick and I are exactly the same age, and I know that I got Patrick out of the institution in 1997, so he's been out of the institution now for 19 years, so he's somebody I kind of feel like I'm travelling through life with him. It was a very anxious period. He was described as the second most challenging person in the institution, so springing him from the institution was quite a frightening process for me, and I'm sure I lost a lot of my hair at that point. But he thrives now, and having control over his budget and being able to be creative, we were able to purchase a very different house, not because we had lots of money, but because the personal budget, we could say, this is Patrick's personal budget. We went to the bank and said, will you loan us money for a mortgage so that Patrick can move into a house of his own? And we were also able to get a mortgage that had enough rooms so that Patrick could have flatmates. So we were able to afford to have 2 people around so that we felt they were safe and Patrick would be safe if there was any kind of problem. So his support was a combination of people hand-picked for Patrick as workers and hand-picked for Patrick as flatmates. He had a car, he had a team, and his family, who were not rich, but they were able to organise we changed the word, didn't we, to make it correct, rahastal, so like a legal trust to manage the house, to take control of the house. Because of his intellectual impairment, Patrick wouldn't have been allowed to own a house in his own right. So we all came together to make this work, but we couldn't have done it without flexible funding. Here's a very different example, very much simpler example, not anywhere as extreme, but I think there's something very important about this story too. Helen had a car accident. She had received a brain injury, which gave her an intellectual impairment. The only service the council could, she was living at home with her mother, she was in her early 20s, she was a young, beautiful woman, and she knew she was beautiful. Her email address was sexy legs, yes? So that's how she saw herself. But the only service she could get was a domiciliary care service from the council when they sent along, and I'm sorry, I am now in my 50s, so I think I feel like I can say this, but they would send along women in their 50s and 60s to support Helen. She hated it. Like, can you imagine, we don't think about these things enough. Can you just imagine being 20, wanting to go with your friends to the shops or to go and live the life that you want to live, but you have to bring along with you somebody your mother's age. Yes? It doesn't work, does it? So Helen wanted a personal budget so that she could employ family and friends that she knew and she wanted to spend time with. So I'm actually not going to give you a chance to, and that actually is a perfect time. So that is 2 o'clock. Coffee for half an hour. We'll come back, carry on, and we will have some chance for questions in the middle of the next session. Thanks.